All right, I'm unpausing the record.
Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the meeting of the Capital Planning Committee, Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. It's 6:00 p.m. in the Ritter Lower Conference Room, our first meeting of the new season. In attendance to call the meeting to order, I will call a roll. Mr. Menard.
Here.
Mr. Beardmore.
Here.
Mr. Martin.
Here.
Brenner. Here. And the town manager is also in attendance. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and is being broadcast live. Is it being broadcast live or just recorded? Okay, it's being broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Channel and on Facebook Live, and will be uploaded to the Lunenburg Access YouTube channel within 24 hours after the conclusion of the meeting. If you have Zoom and would like to join, the meeting number is 792-737-0353, and if you want to dial in, you can do so at 888-475-4499. And again, the webinar ID is 792-737-0353. The posted agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may be in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. So, without further ado, we are called to order. And I will start by asking if there's any public comments from the committee members.
I have a comment. It's more of a suggestion than a comment. I'd like to suggest that we do a slight reorder of the agenda and following public comment, move the discussion of policies or procedures for this upcoming budget season ahead of reorganization. And my thinking for doing that is I would like clarity of the intent of the officers that we're about to elect prior to that election. And I think that having an open discussion about how we're going to do things this year would be pertinent to determine who is chair and so forth and so on.
There's no objection. We're going to get to everything on the agenda, so the order is fine, irrelevant to me. Okay. Any other members have suggestions, comments, anecdotes? No. Okay. Any public comment from the public? Let me see if I can even see the public. Okay, there are no people joined in. All right. So, with Mr. Beardmore's suggestion, we will jump to discussion of policies or procedures for the upcoming budget season. So basically, Mr. Menard, you are new to the committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
And everybody else is a member coming back, so we all know what the policies were. I don't know to what extent you are familiar with the policies that we had, or procedures, probably more procedures than policies, but.
Yeah, I haven't seen them. Are they written down or just kind of?
I don't know that I've seen them written, but.
There's a capital plan policy, it's in the select boards.
Okay.
Right. I can try to pull, can you try to pull it off, if possible?
It doesn't matter. I can look at it later. I just.
In short, I will try to summarize.
Okay.
So, our goal is, of course, to make recommendations on capital projects that are and purchases that are submitted to us by various departments and department heads and other entities that may come before us. Generally, they're all, town or school departments. They present to us at our request, and I'm assuming those will probably be going out soon if they haven't already, the request from the departments for what their projects or purchases might be. we get that list and they present to us, department by department, describing what the request is for, what is the purpose, what is the price, all the things, all the questions we might have. We get to ask questions that we might have regarding those projects and purchases. We go through everybody's, and we can call people back if there's further questions. And at the end of that process, it is all geared toward the goal of having a committee prioritized list of those purchases from which the town manager would eventually choose, given the funding available, what would get funded. The town manager obviously plays a big part in A, providing information, B, providing input, and C, makes the final determination, because the capital planning committee, while submitting our list, the town manager can choose items out of the order that we have, depending upon, reasoning, obviously. That's basically best practice. It's not in there. I mean, potentially, town manager can choose any project from any place and fund it, but presumably they would give a requirement, especially being part of the discussion. So in the past, we have not seen wild changes, like something ranked in 20th gets put at second, but there's been swaps because of, her perceived priority. That is what our practice has been. We try to do all of that, and by charter, we have to get that done by the end of the year, to the start of the budget season, so that can be included in the town manager's preliminary budget, which comes up somewhere in the middle or end of January. Is that accurate?
Capital plan has to be presented by mid-January, preliminary budget by mid-February.
Okay, so that is what our practices have been, and there's no, like I said, there are policies that are, referred to as part of practice, not necessarily as part of a written set of policies.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the requirement in the charter, I believe, I'm drawing from memory here, so bear with me, I could be completely wrong, is that the capital plan is presented by the town manager 120 days prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. Is that, and again, I'm just pulling from memory here, so I could be wrong.
I don't, yeah, I can look up the days, but it's outlined, that's why it's mid-January.
4 months, that would not, that date would not fit in before the fiscal year. The fiscal year is July 1st.
Right, it would bring you to the end of February.
Right, but I think it's gotta be, I think it's before then. From where we can, again, the charter is online.
Yeah, I'm just drawing from memory.
So that's fine. So anyway, I just wanted to give Mr. Menard just an overview of what policy is. So now it's open. If anybody has changes they want to see in how we're doing things that the committee wants to discuss.
So at a high level, I have a few things that, I've expressed in previous meetings. These shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but I would like to see if perhaps as a committee we can discuss them and kind of see where we're at on these. The bylaw calls for the capital planning committee to arrive at a comprehensive capital plan. And I don't personally think that past practice rises to the level of a comprehensive capital plan. I think that what we do is we act as a body to prioritize a list, effectively a recommendation to the town manager for the next fiscal year. But the way the charter and bylaw deals with the capital plan, it's looking at it actually over a much longer period of time. And I think that is going to be increasingly important for our departments to be able to determine the attitude and preferences and priorities of the capital planning committee as they look at out years and begin to strategize. And that's just not something that we have done. The practice instead has been that the requests are aggregated, and then the town manager effectively reports on the delta between the projected funding and the requests. And that is effectively, and please correct me if you see it differently, but that is effectively the way the 10-year capital plan is presented. The reason why I think that this is going to be increasingly important to us in the coming years is because our facilities needs exceed our borrowing capacity substantially. The building committee is working on a plan, a phased plan, that in my view is pretty much going to eat our borrowing capacity. And their charter does not include Turkey Hill. And over the course of this past year, the school committee did an assessment on what it would cost to bring Turkey Hill to the point that it could continue to serve us effectively for the next 10 to 15 years. And that number came to $14 million, and that excludes ADA compliance. And so what is going to be needed, in my view, is a lot of work on the part of the building committee and the select board to be able to determine strategically how we land at a mix of what we do for exempted borrowing, what we potentially should do for capital planning, and so on and so forth. But for us to really begin to plan strategically, particularly if Turkey Hill is the odd man out here and is not part of a comprehensive borrowing plan, that there's some degree of certainty that the 10-year capital plan is a plan of record, and that it has some meat to it, it has some substance behind it. And in my view, our past practice is not something that would get us to that end. And so I think that, and I don't have a specific prescription for how to get there, but I think that as a group, we ought to work on how we could perhaps give some level of indication of where the out-year projects fall. Another, area of potential to look at is, the town manager submitted, and I was glad to see it, an inventory. It was the closest thing to a comprehensive inventory I think that I've seen in my time in serving on committees in the town. Boy, we've got a lot of vehicles. And as I look at that and look at the vehicles that are even not projected for replacement, I start to wonder, okay, well, what are the gotchas and the whatabouts and all of that on that plan as well? And I wonder what we're missing as we look at the 10-year capital plan. So that's one area that I think I'd like to make progress on this year. I'm not sure if we can solve the problem entirely. I don't want to be unrealistic, but I think that just doing it the way we've done it in the past, because that's the way that we've done it in the past, I don't think is a recipe for long-term success. The other issue that I think I would like to see us tackle this year is actually a policy issue and a recommendation that could ultimately lead to either a new policy and or some staffing changes. And this relates to the level of completeness and oversight that comes with capital planning requests. So we get over the course of the last year, and even before that when I was on the finance committee, there was a constant complaint that, well, that's just an estimate. Where did that estimate come from? How valid is the estimate? And it's turned out, at least with respect to the school committee, that some of the estimates weren't all that great. But there's no standard to which I'm aware that says that an estimate needs to include these criteria. And if we were to elevate the criteria and say it needs to have a certain level of engineering, well, there's no funding to get to that level of engineering. So it's not a problem where there's an obvious solution. One of the areas that has been suggested multiple times in meetings that I've been a part of is, perhaps we need to look at a town engineer who is involved in these things and can ensure that, certain proposals do have a certain level of resiliency to them if they're going to be approved as a capital plan. Again, I think this is a policy/staffing issue that I think the capital planning committee, while it's not part of our charter, part of our charge to do it, I think would have a unique perspective on helping us to get someplace where there's greater consistency and quality in capital plan requests. Those are my two areas that I think we should talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Peter says. I work for the federal government as a contractor, right? And when we bring forward proposals, we have to have a basis of estimate. I don't know if you guys do that, but I don't know how, I think that should be a practice that we do is, if you're buying a police cruiser, sure, basis of estimate is probably pretty easy to come up with. If you're doing the air conditioning at the school or a culvert or maybe that's a harder thing to do, but we should be reviewing that so that the capital plan we put forward makes sense. In addition to the things that Peter mentioned, infrastructure is also done. I mean, you look down this list and the things that were built in the 50s or before with respect to roads and culverts. I mean, there's one here that's 173 years old.
Fairly broken.
Yeah, so I think there's a hard look on that, and the time phasing of those repairs has to be done probably to the same level of goodness that we've done with the pavement management plan, and they're somewhat related, I think. And then finally, I do want to make sure that, and we kind of did this on FinCom, is make sure that whatever requests come from the departments, that there's good alignment with the boards and commissions that are associated with those departments. Whether it be cemetery or parks or school. I mean, school may be one that is pretty well aligned, but I don't know if all the other ones are as well. So I do agree that I think our primary goal should be towards, that 10-year plan, perhaps even that 20-year plan in some cases, and aligning it with the building committee, aligning it with FinCom's recommendations so that we are set, we are in good shape year after year after year because of the detail that we put into this. Because I do feel that it seems to be more of a year-by-year kind of thing. And kind of these pop-ups always come up, and the pop-ups, we probably should have known about that, and it probably should have been on the plan, the 10-year plan all along. So I would agree with what Peter says on this.
I mean, I'm not thinking at the levels that you guys are, but when I see the police department come in, they've got like a 10-year plan. The fire department comes in, they've got a 10-year plan. We're gonna buy a couple cruisers this year, a couple of cruisers this year, the fire engine ready, and the ambulance in 5 years. I mean, I've kind of seen all that over the last 3 years, so I'm not saying I'm not in agreement with you, but it's like, I've kind of seen a lot of this stuff.
So what I've observed is that vehicles, to their credit, the police department has actually deferred on some vehicles over the course of the last couple of years, right? The chief has come and said, we don't actually need that this year, and has deferred a year. In fact, last year I don't think we bought any cruisers. But I think that there are capital items that are frontline delivery of service items like cruisers and ambulances that you really can't defer past their serviceable life.
Right.
Whereas there are things with buildings that have clearly been deferred way past their serviceable life. And in the case of the school department, as an example, those past practices have put us in really disadvantageous positions, right? The reason why we're in the state we're in with TC Passios is exactly that set of conditions, right? Where we just kick the can beyond the point of sustainability with that building to the point that the school committee said we can't operate the building anymore. And they exited. And the Brooks House is it has a very similar story to it.
Right.
And
But I think part of that is the voters, right? The Brooks House keeps coming up, goes to town meetings for do this, do that, and the voters kick it down the road.
well, I don't know, we deprioritized 3 or 4 items relative to the Brooks House last year, sitting at this table.
Yeah, because we focused on the security issues at the school. That became a fire drill.
I agree, but to the point, nobody has said since the Vertex study, that this is what we're gonna do when we're gonna do it, right? And we have actually done a really, I think, we've done a commendable job actually with respect to the Vertex stuff.
So I'm not saying this is on any one or multiple committees. The town doesn't really seem to be on board with a lot of this stuff when it comes up. And that's been my experience that I've sort of lived through.
Just for clarity, when you say the town, you mean town meeting?
Yeah, town meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be clear, the capital planning committee is not bringing forth exempted borrowing items,
Right.
right? So if something gets voted down as an exempted borrowing major capital project, as is what happened with TC Passios or what has happened with other projects over the course of the last, as long as I've been alive in Lunenburg, it's happened probably a dozen times over my lifetime. That's not the purview of the capital planning committee, right? What we're doing is we are advising on how we spend money within the omnibus budget. There's going to be a certain amount of money available every year for capital. And we recommend to the town manager how that happens. Right? I mean, that is the extent of our purview, really, right?
Up till, yes. That is from its inception, that has been the intent. To a degree. I mean, there is some mention in the charter about the 10-year plan. We can talk more about that, but five-year plan, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So,
There is a 10-year reference somewhere.
yeah, but anyway, so yes, what you just said is accurate. So capital planning is, okay, what do we plan to do with the capital we have? I think is more in capital projects. It is in my mind, well, I'll hold off. I don't know if Matthew has any.
Yeah. I think I settle in fairly close in alignment with Mr. Beardmore and Mr. Menard in the notion that I feel like we sit, now I only have 1 year experience here, and maybe with more years experience at this table, all sorts of information falls out and becomes readily apparent. But right now, I feel like last year I was making decisions in a vacuum. And I deprioritized something on my personal list, and it's not really clear if that is something that will ever get funded, or what we can defer. And a plan would be outstanding for understanding that. I think it might have been you, Mr. Menard, who mentioned the whole idea of engineering plan. Of the engineers who come in, I know Vertex did this at one point, and say, okay, here's your useful life on everything, here's when it needs to be replaced. I put a lot of stock in that, and I know those aren't perfect. I've been with other organizations, and I can see how those work good and how they can be inaccurate. But I feel like without a comprehensive plan understanding what we're looking at, with that engineering understanding, with a more thorough even explanation of what is likely to get funded through other means, it makes it, I would say, challenging to make a good decision, and I would actually argue potentially impossible to know if you're making a good decision. Now again, maybe with multiple years on this committee that becomes more apparent. I would then argue that unless we're going to unless the tenure of service on this committee is going to be a decade, that still isn't a great solution because
Or practical.
but because we need to know what we're looking at, and I would rather put in time and effort now so that we and future iterations of this committee can make the best decisions for the town, so that we're not risking leaving something on the side that really needs to be done, and also so that we're not risking funding something that, quite frankly, money could likely come from somewhere else. And that would be another, and maybe that's not strictly within the idea of a 5-year capital plan, but golly, would that be helpful info when figuring all this out.
Yeah, I concur that police and fire's plans are usually really good. I even, when the recommendation came to FinCom on to raise the capital plan limit, I made the recommendation, just put vehicles in the operating budget. Why do they have to have 3 vehicles every year on the, so I have no problem with all that, right? But it is the infrastructure, it's the big ticket items. It's taken that in consideration with staffing plans, as well as the building committees and the big purchases that are coming down the road. That really, as a FinCom member, if I'm making recommendations, I'd like to see the big picture so that every year it becomes easy to make the smaller level decisions. And I think it becomes, if it's documented and it is something that gets put out there to the public, I think it makes it that town meeting does go faster, because people have that time to ingest it, put their fingerprints on it, think that they're part of the process, whether overtly or behind the scenes. So, but we're, I don't know, $50 million a year business, right? Or whatever, $40 million a year business.
What?
50
Is it 50 now?
I mean,
overall with all
that's a big business to
You're
run.
adding the stuff that's outside of the omnibus.
enterprises
Yeah.
and.
Oh, with enterprises, okay, yeah.
One other kind of nit, maybe, but just back to the ACs at the school. So, like, what's the process we use for, we go ahead and we say we're going to fund a capital plan item, but then the funding is kind of unrealizable for that amount. Do we have a means by which to kind of take that back?
Yep.
Do we write
Another
those
one?
recommendations, or how does that work?
If the town meeting passes it and it's way out of scope, then it comes back and town manager makes a recommendation. Either we go for, if the number is nominally different, we go for an additional funding, or you rescind it. And if it's like not even close, and you say, okay, we're gonna rescind that article and we'll use the money somewhere else.
It's actually addressed in the capital planning policy as well, and I think this question was asked at finance meeting.
Yeah, I don't know if I got an answer, but maybe
I
forget.
directed you to the section of the policy, I think,
Okay.
that night. But it was essentially, if there's not sufficient funding within the capital plan, because there can be a transfer within the plan to cover deficits or with surpluses and other projects. So if it's not able to be covered by that, or the department's operating budget or another source of available revenue, then it would come back to town meeting for additional funding.
What if we want to rescind the funding? Same thing?
It would be a town meeting vote.
Okay.
Right, if it's town meeting article that voted it, it's gotta be a town meeting article that rescinds it. So my take on the 2 recommendations, so you're right, not surprised, because you brought this up before. So I'll take them separately. The 5 or 10-year plan, first of all, I would say 5, because that's in the charter, but 10, I will tell you that doing this long enough at all different levels, being on the finance committee, being on the select board, if you think anything is going to be close to what you predict in a 5-year plan, when it gets to that 5 years, then there's a kind of a rude awakening that happens. So as much as you can plan, things come up and get prioritized for various reasons. So I think this should be a plan. I think it's addressable insofar as this committee meets from now till the end of the year, basically, and we don't meet the rest of the year. If we wanted to work on the 5-year plan, we would address meeting all year, or at least another season, outside of the budget cycle where we just talk about long-term planning. That's certainly possible. But there's certain limitations, I think, that exist with that goal. It's a laudable goal. But unless, I mean, Mr. Beardmore suggests maybe it's gonna take a town engineer. Well, we're gonna be putting another person on the payroll that we're gonna have them, you know, look at projects and everything. I mean, that's a lot of other work to do. And in the end, you're still gonna be trusting someone's data. Somebody's gonna be presenting something to this committee, and we're gonna trust it or not trust it unless we're engineers ourselves and know the particular subject matter. I mean, at some point you have to trust the people who are working for you. Now, I think some of the things, larger ticket items, like facilities, have not been addressed because there's not been facilities directors on either the school or the town side. Those had been filled, and I'd like to see some people who fill those. We haven't really had a long-term, nobody's been in more than a year yet, or a year and a half or something. So when we get them, it would be their job to present those long-term plans. That's why the police and the fire have it. I think it's a little easier department to project out into the future. It's a little more predictable because most of it is equipment-oriented and staffing-oriented, whereas facilities can have, you know, something happen unexpected. Or the maintenance has been so deferred that things come up that are expected, but are more emergencies than other things. So I think we need to get that under control, but I don't know if it's this body that does that. I mean,
Let me give you a practical example, Tom. By the way, for those of you who may not be aware, we currently have a vacancy in facilities in the school department, again, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so.
I didn't know that.
And it's been vacant for about a month.
Okay.
We're in the interviewing process right now. But the school committee worked very closely with the previous facilities director, specifically on Turkey Hill last year. Because we wanted what we were calling a Turkey Hill Get Healthy plan. Two things became apparent in that. One will be brought to your attention, I hope, in the select board in short order, is that basically any of the large systems in that building, when you go to replace them and bring them up to code or make them new again, it's going to trigger an ADA compliance issue because of the assessed value of the property. So if you update the HVAC system in that building, you're going to update the HVAC system and do an ADA project. Or if you do a new plumbing or electric or whatever in that building, because of the substantial costs associated with those major projects, you got to do an ADA project to go along with that. Two things relate to that. Number one is we don't hire facilities people who are capable of engineering an HVAC system for a 60-year-old building. It's just out of the capacity of anybody that we would ever hire in that job. And when you bring in a company and say, can you give me an estimate for this? It's truly Kentucky windage because it requires engineering to really know. So an estimate is just that. It's an estimate. So that $14 million that I referred to earlier is an estimate. It's, probably, an order of magnitude off. I don't know for sure. I honestly don't. The ADA compliance issue with that building is a substantial issue. Most people think elevators when they think ADA compliance and sidewalk curbs. The biggest issue in that building is the doorway width and the turning radius going into bathrooms. There are boys and girls bathrooms on the first and second floor of the classroom wings in that building that are of a certain width, that require a certain turning radius to allow for the appropriate level of privacy in those bathrooms. And the walls are load-bearing walls. So to make those, we believe, that to make those bathrooms ADA compliant is going to be a major construction project in that building. Again, I couldn't even begin to guess what that's going to cost. It requires engineering to be able to figure that out. that leads to two things. Number one is it's another capital request and another year process to go and figure it out before we have a true comprehensive plan for that building. And we'll be sitting here next year scratching our heads still about the comprehensive plan for Turkey Hill if we go through that process. Or if we had somebody on staff who had that level of knowledge and could figure out what they can do and what they can't do, and then had a budget associated with that to be able to augment those capabilities, we could probably get to much more efficient decision-making. Even if they're not engineering plans per se or blueprints, we could get to better decision-making. And again, I understand we don't have the budget for that headcount right now, right? It's a bit of a pie in the sky kind of thing, but we're all operating on different playing fields. The police chief knows exactly what a new cruiser is going to cost next year. And that is 85 to 90% of anything that he would fathom in a capital request.
Right.
The school department does not have, and the facilities department in the town, for that matter, we don't have that capability. It's a much longer, slower, less accurate activity. And I think that is really an area of weakness that's hanging us up right now as a town.
No, so I'm not, I don't disagree with the fact that we may or may not need an engineer. What I was speaking to was whether this committee, its purpose and its intent should be to basically do what those employees and those heads of departments, that's what their role is. Like, they should come up with the plan, and while it's harder for a facilities director to come up with a 10-year, a 5-year plan than the fire department or the police department, okay, well, so be it. And because they haven't been in the town long enough, it's gonna take them even longer. I just don't, I mean, that's where the expertise has to come to. I don't know, aside from prioritizing, I don't know what this committee would do to, eventually we're still gonna be asked to prioritize them. Because the reason why we're asked to prioritize things is the bottom line of what we're being asked. We don't have the money for it. If we had the money for everything that everybody asked for, we wouldn't need this committee. We would just say, okay, those are the projects, do them.
Yeah.
But we don't have that. So we need people establishing, you know, to the best of our knowledge from our backgrounds on planning and school and finance and select board, what do we think are the best things? To the best of our knowledge.
I think if we could communicate a standard and a timeline associated with that standard, like acknowledge that the way we're doing it is not as efficient or as effective as it should be, and we would like to be at a certain standard by this time in 2024 or 2025 or what have you, then it would give clear guidance to our department heads and to our town manager who builds a staffing plan for the town, and we could figure out how to get there. But by just repeating the same process over and over again with the same deficiencies, the same behavior is going to occur. We are going to get inadequately estimated proposals.
That has not been the history. You chose a project, but for the history of the capital plan, that has not been the history of plans that have been approved, that they've come in and they've been severely not budgeted well. That AC one, which by the way, that capital planning committee did not want to put on there. It got lobbied to put on there, okay, after the fact. You know, that was the anomaly. That's not the rule. I mean, generally, because the town manager gives reports on where the capital plans for the last few, and she just gave one recently, you know, things get done with those numbers. The numbers that we get generally are fairly accurate. I mean, is that a correct statement?
Right, and the last couple of years have been an anomaly as well because of supply chain issues and
Yeah, I mean, it's been a
prices
crazy time,
and inflation.
Right.
But that's
That's a fair point.
outside of that.
I mean, as I look at what's coming in the next couple of years, I think that we are going to have requests on our capital plan that 7 figures is the norm
Oh, but yeah.
for certain
Yeah,
projects.
yeah, and I think
And so
George's,
when something is 10% out of tolerance on a 7-figure project versus 10% out of tolerance on a 6-figure project, it's 10 times more out of, it's 10 times greater impact.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fear that particularly when I looked at that Turkey Hill project that we looked at last year at the school committee, I couldn't help but think, oh boy, this is going to be a mess in terms of if we have to shepherd this entirely through the capital planning process. And by the way, maybe we don't. Maybe we do that as a debt exemption, but if we do that as a debt exemption, then it's something else that the building committee is considering that has to go through a capital planning, there's only so much debt capacity.
Well,
so we're gonna have to take multiple bites at the apple over the next 10 years to be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish from a facility standpoint.
I agree.
So I have one idea I want to push back on, and then I have kind of a broader question about how department heads are actually submitting their capital plan. The pushback is, I hear the statement of the past few years are an anomaly. Maybe those of you who are more tuned into some of this, you could convince me I'm wrong. I'm under the impression they are different than what happened in the past, but I have not seen strong indications that we're going to be facing different scenarios with supply chains and inflation going forward. I have not seen any reports that signify it's going to get better, and I've been privy to some reports from organizations that have indicated it ain't. That we're just kind of, this is the new normal for the foreseeable future. Welcome to unpredictable inflation. Welcome to supply chain issues. So I'm hesitant to say, oh, that's an anomaly, only in that I think we're going to keep seeing it.
So
and that's a worry I have.
So my comment to that would be twofold. So first of all, inflation is not what's been hurting us. Okay? Maybe it will at some point, but what's hurting us with supply chain, for instance, getting trucks that we have budgeted for the DPW, that we put out bids and nobody can supply the trucks because the trucks don't have them now. I can't possibly disagree with you that it's the new normal, but it's too early to see if it's the new normal because it's only been happening for the last 2 years. So I don't know what the new normal is, and any prediction to say that it's going to stay the same or it's going to get better is just that. It's just going to be a prediction. We can say that there is histories of, if you're a truck manufacturer, you make trucks, right? Trucks are used by snowplow trucks are used in the Northeast and the north of this country forever, for years and years and years. And so there is some kind of reliable feeling that you need to be able to get people to supply trucks of what they say they built. And if they don't, year after year, pandemic, people use it possibly as an excuse. Now they may use it as an excuse to keep prices high and everything in check. That's certainly possible.
I would argue that I feel that there is evidence that is already happening and will be the new normal. We could disagree on that as well, that's fine, but I'm not super comfy. I would rather plan based around those kinds of issues intentionally ahead of time and then be pleasantly surprised, rather than assume anything like it used to be is going to continue.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If you go to a truck, just to use this example, if you go to get a truck and you put out, hey, give me a bid for this truck, and you don't get any bids for the truck that you asked for because they don't have any, how do you plan for that? How do you plan to get something that nobody was providing? They didn't come back to you saying, oh my God, the price is 20% higher. They're saying they don't have any. Like, how do I plan for that?
So now, I'm going to be do I have the whole answer? Absolutely not. I'm not going to pretend I do. I don't know what can be done with a capital plan to work in some level of agility. And what I mean by that is town government is painfully slow. And that is no one's fault. That is the structure of this beast. Our legislative body meets twice a year. And there are those with the philosophy that only because one is special town meeting, one is town meeting, there's those with the philosophy that only one of those is real. And the other one isn't and should only be used for a very niche set of things. But because of that, it's like we talked about, great, so okay, so 1 year we can get an estimate, then the next year we can kind of work based off that estimate, and I don't know the solution, but I see this handicapping us. Here, I see variants of it on the planning board. It's an ongoing concern of mine. Now, all of that said, I guess a question I have. Now, if this comes across as pejorative, I do not mean it that way, and I really want to be overt. Are department heads submitting their actual capital plan needs, or are they submitting a strategic capital plan need, knowing that things are going to get cut? I mean, there's a whole, right, you ask for the sun and the moon and the stars, but you ask more than you know you're going to get. That way it makes, there's obvious cuts. We called it the hairy arm in document design. Is you have all your nice photos, but one of them of the product accidentally has the corner of someone's arm in it. And that way the client goes, hey, okay, this is a good document, but I see you got the photo with the hairy arm. Can you retake that photo? Now, great, they found their flaw, and now the rest of the document feels good in comparison. Are there hairy arms? Are people submitting more than they necessarily need? That way there is something that can strategically get cut. So
I would say, I have a quick response to that.
Yeah.
I would say that is the purpose of this committee.
I agree with you.
The purpose of this committee is to make sure that, hey, if you don't justify it to us, then we're not gonna approve it. And if you come up with, it's not like any department is guaranteed money. If a department comes up with 3 projects and we don't believe any of them, then they won't get any money. So.
I guess where I'm going with that then is I feel that a capital plan with a comprehensive view, not just individual departments saying, this is my 10-year plan, this is my 10-year plan, this is my 10-year plan, but having a comprehensive plan, even knowing it will shift, would help us have a holistic view rather than several silos that are each effectively an individual's interpretation of their department. That's a gross oversimplification, and I'm aware of it, and again, both for the members of this committee, for the department heads, and for the public viewing, none of this is meant pejoratively or negatively. I'm not surreptitiously or overtly trying to put anyone else. My broader point is, knowing that this can be the case, I would rather we had a comprehensive view so that we could be making these decisions maybe less impacted by individual kind of preferences or thoughts, or even individual strategizing to maybe get a bigger piece of the pie that they would view as maybe their fair piece of the pie.
I think I take a slightly different tack on what I think you're getting at, which is I think that a clearer, comprehensive view, longer-term comprehensive view from the capital planning committee that is articulated will lead to better decision-making and better strategic thinking at the department level.
I agree with that as well.
So let me give you an example. We brought up the Brooks House. When somebody comes and presents a plan this year to rebuild the front porch on the Brooks House relative to all of the other requests that we're going to get this year, I don't want to prejudice myself, but I will to a certain degree. It's probably going to land right where it landed last year. Right? Still on the vertex, still, we're just kicking that can further and further and further down the road. Now, wouldn't it be beneficial to a facilities director or the town manager or somebody to say, not only was it number 27 of 28 last year, but it's probably going to be 27 or 28 for the next 5 years. Because relative to all of the other things on the list, it just ain't going to get above the line. And that would allow for decisions to be made that are hard decisions. But there's a clear indicator that the primrose path is covered with pricker bushes, you know? And you know, there are, I could give you a school department example, right? Like, aside from all of the other needs that we have in the school department, which could be multi-million dollars for the athletic facility, the primary school is now 20 years old, the middle high school is now 7 or 8 years old, like things are, you know, gonna start to crop up in all of our facilities. Our vehicles, as you saw in that inventory, are not new. Most of I think our average vehicle is a 2007 in the school department. We have $14 million of needs that I can point to right now, aside from ADA in Turkey Hill. If we're not gonna get that, then it would be good to be able to make decisions knowing that, sooner rather than later, right? But we could just continue to kick the can for the next 10 years and then find ourselves in an emergency situation in 7 or 8 years, when a critical system fails and we just can't fix it, right? So, I mean, I think that we need to give better indicators to our department heads about what is feasible and what is not.
I would kind of back it up further by saying that strategy also helps department heads plan better when they flagrantly disagree with what we've put forward. So rather than coming forward and saying, yeah, we need this at the Brooks house, and I'm just going to put that due to its low status last year. We need the front porch on the Brooks house, and then if it seems likely we're going to say no again, and they know that lets them come forward and say, no, wait, time out. I know you want to say no. I know that's kind of been the indicator here, but there's information you don't have that I think really is going to impact your decision-making process. And I think that level of telegraphing from us could really help the back and forth dialogue potentially to come to better solutions overall.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you have the capital plan, the out years, you can even consider them as budgets towards certain departments. So they can say, hey, you're likely to get this amount of budget in 6 years, in 7 years, 10 years. And I think that would help them with the long-term planning. So I don't think you need to have an actual item on there per se in the out years, but more, here's the budget that we anticipate based on historical projects that we've seen. The other thing I would say is I'm not in favor of hiring a town engineer, because I think, I know I am an engineer, and I know everyone thinks that engineers are the, you know, most brilliant people in the world and know everything about anything.
I was just telling you that.
I know, you were. But the truth is, that's why you have engineering firms, because you have a lot of specialties. And if you were able to put like an engineering firm on retainer, they could route it in and solve the issue with specialists versus some, you know-it-all engineer, which we're also called, I guess, too. So.
Which is, I think, why that was made part of the process in the last couple of years, is making that part of the criteria that is engineering needed for this project. So I think that's where it brings in what you brought up, Peter, about that planning aspect and the comprehensive view. They aren't kind of on that level playing field for your building project, or you know you're going to need planning for it. If that's known, put that in as a project. Same goes with bridges. We've done that on multiple capital years, culverts. So all of those need that planning aspect. Marshall Park brings that. I have a lot more.
Golly, is that a hard sell to the community, though?
And so,
What is?
I kind of, I mean, this is my planning board hat as well, and I know that. I love the idea of paying engineers to know what the heck's going on. I love the idea of paying engineering firms for exactly the reason Mr. Menard cited. But the pushback I hear, I've heard it in this room, I hear it in the community, I hear it left and right. Why are we giving them $20,000, $50,000 to tell us if we can even do this project? And the answer is, because that's what it actually takes to know if we can do the project.
Right.
But, that goes over like, it goes over like a fart in church. I don't have a better analogy. But it's one of those that people's faces go sour. They don't like the idea of spending money to know if they're going to spend money. And I guess this part is not really part of this group's purview. Now I'm wondering out loud, but I like wondering out loud in front of people in the case it becomes their purview at some point. Maybe there's a different way of funding those engineering projects that aren't this group, so that they maybe can get funded with less yucky feelings from the community or from members here or wherever.
Well, I'd like to see $100,000, I don't know what the number is, in your operating budget, that you can just have engineers on retainer.
That's where I was going with it.
Whatever the number is, I think that, and again, I don't think we solve this problem here tonight, but my point in bringing it up is that I think if we had a policy that says that we expect a certain level of quality or agility or whatever, and it's within a year or 2 years or whatever, we can make a plan as a community to be able to meet that criteria, whatever it is. The point that you just made around engineering, how do you rationalize $75,000 in engineering for ADA work for Turkey Hill, which we may or may not do that work, right? It's literally, just as you described, $75,000 just to know, right? Versus $75,000 for a cruiser. Or a utility truck for the fire department, right? Like, I mean,
But our job is,
it's apples to oranges. It really is.
our job is to weigh that. That's the whole point of this committee. That's our job, is to weigh that. Because there are other things.
But it's two decisions, Tom. Because
But maybe even more than two decisions. That's not even the point. The point is that, see, I think there's a top-down approach and then there's the approach. So when corporations, large corporations, they have like budgeting committees. And all departments, whether you're the advertising, marketing department, and the support department, and development department, every sales department, everybody puts in what their budget requests are. And it's the budget committee's decision to say, you know what, this makes sense to me, we're gonna put more money into here than here and here. All right? That's what our decision is, to help, to assist with the town manager and like doing that. Not to tell them what their 10-year plan is. Like, if we have to go back and we don't trust that the departments are giving us good 5-year plans, and I've said this about things in the past, like if somebody's working for you and you don't trust the work that they do, I'm not looking to necessarily make them better, I'm looking for another person to do it. So that's what I think our goal is. I'm not looking to be the overarching people who put together the plan. I want those departments to tell me what do their departments need. Now, the facilities has been left out because it was kind of the orphan child of DPW and not even part of schools, and it was kind of, now that we have those, even if they're not filled, then we need them to come up with the plan. Now, unfortunately, like you just said, Peter, a cruiser is X amount of money. Everybody knows what it is, everybody can see it, we know how much it takes to run it, and any single element of a facility, especially an aging building, has numbers beyond, it goes with another digit place out. There's no getting around that. Now, if you're saying, hey, why don't we just say that we're not gonna fund Brooks House, I would say to you two things. First of all, de facto, we have said that, okay? Second of all, we don't have the purview because town meeting has the final budget. But if you're asking me, if I'm facilities and I say, listen, you're telling me I have to take care of these buildings, this is an aging building, nobody has ever funded, I still need the porch. Until you tell me that we're not doing anything with that building as an entity, as a town, I don't think it's this committee's decision to make that for them. I mean, and that's been the problem, because all the things that have been haunted town meeting about the facilities have been that the town has waffled back and forth, and no one's adopted a plan that wasn't immediately at the next town meeting kind of superseded and somebody else brought something else. That's why we've had 7 years of building reuse and municipal design and everything.
I mean, I can see the fact, I said last night at a school committee meeting, this is more horseshoes than archery. You know, like, it's a very imprecise game.
Well, unless you're an expert at both of them. But yeah, for the average person, yes, it's more.
So, I feel as if, we're at a point of just incredible indecision, particularly when it comes to
Yeah,
this.
but the town, I agree, I've been vocal to that, but I think for this committee, I think our goal is to let them say what they need for their departments, and us to say, okay, you're having it from a singular point of view from your department, we have to look at all of those and say, okay, what do we feel is best for the town in its entirety, knowing that we can't fund everything.
I don't totally agree with that, because I think this is the capital planning committee, not the capital review committee, which may be what we really are.
Well, I think you're talking about title, I think that's what we've been doing, right.
Well, but I don't think that's the chart, I don't think that's what was intended with the charter update. But I do think strategy comes into this, and as, as a board in town, leading ultimately through FinCom and in, for recommendation into town meeting, they're gonna look to us to be the arbiter across all the, the needs of the departments, as well as help to align it to a strategic vision that this town drastically needs.
But yes on the notion of a strategic vision. I could not agree more on that concept.
And again, some things are obvious, right? Yeah, we need new tractors and new trucks and new this and got it. But that's not, I think, where the strategy aspects comes in. It's do we really want to invest $250,000 in the Brooks House? Said another way, would we pay $250,000 to buy the Brooks House? Right? I would say no. And I see no indication.
And this committee has basically determined that.
But it's like it's got $130,000.
Because we, as a 5-person committee, don't have the ability to dissolve what we feel or to sell or authorize to sell the Brooks House or to demolish it. That's another department. Like, our goal isn't to say you should demolish the Brooks House.
But I would say that these 06, 01, 3, 4, and 2, which total $130,000 in fiscal '25, you guys last year probably should have said that's out in fiscal '33.
And that's what I'm aiming to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, my intent here is not to make policy or to do your job to bring an article to town meeting to say to demolish the Brooks House or sell it or move it or whatever.
The one's highlighted?
It's
Maybe they have.
to be able to provide more than an indicator that you just referred to. And you're absolutely right. Like, I think we've effectively said it without saying it.
Right.
What I'm saying is we should say it. At least with respect to the next 4 years, we should say, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, here's our order of merit list for the next 5 years, right? Like we do the current year. It could be, this is a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, or you know what I mean? Like some kind of indicator that at least says, this falls into our vision of a strategic priority. It aligns with the strategy that's been set by the select board, articulated by the school committee, whatever the case might be, but a point of rationalization saying, okay, given all of the other things that come along, this is where we think the priorities will be in the out years.
Pushing back against this idea that I agree with, but trying to be thorough, a challenge with this, and I don't think it's insurmountable, but it requires thought, is, again, we have a 3-year tenure in this committee, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, you know, I go, yeah, because in reality.
Because there are appointments by different committees, so as long as you stay on your board or committee, or unless that board decides to keep you on after you're no longer elected.
No.
They have to be removed.
You have to be removed.
We went through
Okay, there you go. Oh, did we? Okay, there you go.
But,
So yes, 3 years then.
But,
There you
well,
go.
except by the same token, let's be honest, we are all I think we're all, I don't know, I am at least, I haven't checked for every elected role, completely unpaid. We.
You didn't get your pay?
But and that's not a complaint, but it means that, I mean, I am completely dedicated to my role on the planning board. I'm completely dedicated to my role here. Life thing could happen tomorrow that isn't even world ending, but it could easily be big enough that makes me look at the thing I do for free in my quote spare time for the good of my community to say, nope. And so even that 3 years isn't a real 3 years. And the challenge there is, and I face this again, I face this with other organizations, how do you maintain a unified vision with that kind of rotation? And the answer can be you don't. But then any plan made by this committee isn't a plan. It's
That's any committee.
But
Yeah,
that's any municipal entity,
Yeah,
so that's Congress, for Christ's sake.
You
I mean,
describe
it's
any
anything.
committee in Lunenburg, and my answer would be, you do the best you can.
well, so, and I'm fine with
And
that.
you rely on the work that you've done in the past, because you can't necessarily, you just don't have the luxury of repeating it, frequently, you know, so you.
I
So
would like us
say
to-
that, take R&D, right? We plan R&D in my company for 5-10 years, and it gets better over time, right? The closer you get to it. But you do have the situations where one R&D director moves out and another one moves in, and he's got a solid plan in front of him, and now he can step in and run with it because there's more of just like a couple.
Right, or he could just totally rip it out and put it in his own plan, his or her own.
Well,
He's
I
gotta
mean,
sell it.
there's five
He's gotta sell
people,
it, right?
Right.
So, and I do think boards and commissions have a big play in this, right? So you see senior center, you see, parks, you see all these others that have to, they take a strategic view as well. That's not the day-to-day that is, that the departments run. So I think they have a play in this as well, to help. And the more that they know, hey, I might be getting this amount of money over this amount of year, the better they can plan out their policies and procedures and visions for those groups.
Well,
I think that's-
well,
Well, I was just gonna say that strategic plan that's submitted by them is the whole rationale behind their priority list. So that's what the committee is reviewing, like this is my top priority, and that ties into their long-term plans, or should.
Should.
It should, yeah.
and we can do what I said, I mean, we can achieve that goal by, after we do our budget season plan, we could meet in the spring, and say, okay, let's look at now that we've done this year's budget plan, the capital plan, let's proceed to a 5-year plan.
Yeah, I know.
We just can't we're not gonna be able to do both in the same season that we're doing now. That would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I know in FinCom that would help me make decisions, if I knew the strategy behind it and the capital plan coming forward to make recommendations.
I'm not
I mean, so
against
many-
doing that.
Yeah, those decisions are being formed by other committees or like the school committee, for example. It has been the plan that we needed a decision on Turkey Hill by fiscal '23 to inform borrowing and decision makings in the future. And we've kept projects going out 10 years because we want to know those major costs going out, even though the charter only says we have to go out 5 years. But those renovation projects are on there for Turkey Hill, but not, rebuild project. But that's what informs the committee, is that decision by, another board. And that's part of the comprehensive plan I think you're talking about,
Yeah.
is more really about facilities than,
Right.
Facilities and infrastructure, I think.
Right. Relating to bridges, talk about what's the plan, like something with pavement management. That was part of my goal this prior year. We updated our pavement management plan, and the plan is to do a similar plan with bridges and culverts. We're going to be looking for grant money to help create that plan. But we've always tried to have like one in a planning phase, one in a construction phase going forward. And because of the cost, we've had to seek grants like the Small Bridge Grant Program to help fund them.
Which are great programs.
Yeah.
But, I think that's awesome. that you're doing that. Like, you know, in my view, looking at, and I understand that the quality of life has changed a little bit on Holman Street, and that'll never be, you know, that'll probably never be rectified, but, you know, Flat Hill Road, like in my mind, like, that could have been avoided. You know, like if we had done something like you're doing now 10 years ago, we would possibly be in a better place where we wouldn't be in the position we're in with Flat Hill Road today, you know, and it's just planning, you know, and prioritization.
You just think you want to say ahead?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Because everybody else is just jumping in, so.
Yeah.
This is dinner table at my house growing up, so just,
It's been a really good conversation. I appreciate your willingness to entertain.
Oh, no, I think it's an important conversation. I mean, I think it's gotten some.
This is what I love about local politics. Are the intense discussion, disagreement at the table to figure out what's best.
Right.
Makes me so happy.
That's civil.
Yeah. So the question is, are there any? Yeah. Wait till you see his post about what you said on social media. But
Oh, I'm a jerk. That's fine. Expect it.
he said he didn't mean anything pejorative. I'm not really sure. So what is an action item from this? What would the board like to take any action on this? Again, if we're gonna do the 5-year plan, which again, I think, you know, I'm willing to take a stab at it, but that means we're gonna meet longer as a committee.
So in rough terms, based on the discussion that we had tonight, in my mind coming into tonight, I was going to suggest that as we're scrutinizing each individual department, we do some kind of green, yellow, red sort of analysis on out-year items, just to be able to get a sense of where the board is in terms of prioritizing the out years. I tend to agree based on your comments, like, in what we went through last year, that's probably not practical. But the way the processes worked, and your suggestion in terms of perhaps doing this in the spring, is when the town manager presents the capital plan, she has presented exactly as I just described at the beginning of the conversation, you know, a roll-up of all the requests for the out years and the delta in terms of how she projects available capital, right? We could use that as a guide.
Yeah.
And say, okay, we come up with a system whereby, as I suggested before, it's a 1, 2, 3 or a 1 through 5 or whatever, and we say, you know, 1s and 2s fall within the budget, 3s, 4s, and 5 are within projected available funds, 3s, 4s, and 5s do not, or something along those lines, right? And what that gives us is, number one, the beginnings of a straw poll and continuity as we go into next year, saying this is kind of where this sat. But it also gives feedback to the department saying this is kind of where your things are sitting relative to the other stuff. And it, to your point earlier, perhaps could strengthen those proposals in the next year and or change their thinking around it.
Well, my thinking is if we do this, if we set up in the spring and we do the 5-year projection, and we tell people as they come in this year, we're gonna be looking to you, so think about that. If we get that done, come this time next year, the first thing we're gonna do, beside the inventory, is gonna look at those plans, and as people come from us and they have differences in their plan and your plan, you're gonna be like, okay, why are there differences here? Like, we need to be able to strategically plan, so if something's new on this list, there better be a good reason why this is new, and there'd be an emergency reason why it's new and why you didn't plan for it. To get people in the mode of thinking ahead.
I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, you know, in all honesty, like, we got, you know, new people, but, you know, like, this is not gonna be entirely smooth, right? You know, at best case, like, I'm thinking about the calendar right now and bringing on a facilities director in the schools, like, okay, we did do a good multiple year plan last year, but I don't know, you know, like, we're gonna have those issues next year, no doubt. But I think that it gives we can build muscle memory over time and get better.
Right.
If we use that approach.
It also helps give guidance to those given that it appears from the outside that some of these professional roles may be a little more revolving a door than might be ideal. it gives guidance to those who come in next
Right.
to have a clue.
Right.
And I think that's great for everyone involved.
Yep.
I'm very willing to work past the January deadline the January deadline is for a specific task
Right.
that has to happen. I'm very willing to keep working on this committee beyond that deadline so that we can be better equipped in future years and so Lunenburg can be better equipped in future years.
They're pretty-
FinCom has an opening if you want to extend that even.
Everybody okay with that? All right, so we don't need a vote, so we're just gonna, because I see nods from everybody. Good. That was a good discussion. All right, so let's get back to the order here. And so now we have the reorg. So of course, we have new members and we need a chair, a vice chair. Do we need a clerk on this? Let's just say we need a clerk.
We do have somebody taking minutes though, right? I think
They'll be looking at the recording.
sent a note to that effect.
Yeah, they'll be looking at the recording. Somebody will be doing the minutes,
Yes,
right?
we do have it.
So, everybody's on a board here, on a committee or a board, you know how this works, so, you know, just entertain nominations for who wants to be chair of Capital Planning Committee this year.
Now, on planning board, we tend to be crazy and while someone needs a nomination, because that's how it works, we let people say if they're interested and why, because that
I have no formal process, so we can do anything. If
Yeah,
people want to
that-
pass notes, if they want to give hand signals, smoke signals, it doesn't matter.
As a freshman, I am not interested. And you're not tricking me.
If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve.
So, I came into tonight's meeting with the intent of putting my name forth as chair. But I did so because I did not think that Tom and I would come to agreement in the conversation that we just had. And I certainly wanted to promote the topics that I brought up over the course of this year. I'm not particularly interested in the logistics of this job, which Tom does a good job with, and just kind of getting us together, and it's a hard job, particularly with our crazy offset planning board school committee cycle. But if
There's a
elected-
loss. Are you interested or
if
you're not
elected, I will
interested?
serve, but I would also be more than happy to vote for you to do that.
I'm more than happy to relinquish chair, for a year. I've been doing it for 2 years, so.
So there might be something, you guys have the
Okay.
biggest budgets, right? But you control the biggest budgets to having schools that kind of have a seat at the table too, as chair.
Yeah, yeah,
Select board and, and
yeah, yeah, it's
to the kind of.
close to 50-50 in terms of oversight.
It's more like 60-40 you, I think, but who's counting?
I personally like the way that, nothing against anybody, but I like the way that Tom runs the meetings. They're just on track and they're fast. And so,
I don't know, it's 7:20. I don't know how fast it is.
yeah, for the most part, it's, I mean, the same with the selectmen's meetings. You just have a way of keeping things moving. And so that more, based on anything, is what I'd like to see you do it again.
I have no desire to be chair of this committee. I'm very comfy running meetings anytime, but the logistical work is beyond my focus capacity right now, so, at home. Of herding cats, as it were.
You guys aren't herding cats, not yet, so that's okay.
So, and that's nothing against anybody else who wants to do it. It just,
So, from what I'm hearing, I would nominate Tom Alonso to chair this committee.
Sorry.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed? And I will abstain. So vice chair, so given that, I think we know who the vice chair should be.
The freshman? No, just kidding.
The freshman's always the clerk.
No, I fell into that trap before.
Well, I will nominate Peter Beardmore to be vice chair.
Second,
Second, or, yeah,
third.
third, yeah.
We have a fourth and a fifth, we won't need a vote. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And abstention, okay. And clerk. We don't have, do we really need a clerk?
Yes.
Okay,
by
we need a
Robert's
clerk.
rules.
All right, by Robert's rules, we need a clerk. So the three of you have to decide who wants to be
I'll
clerk.
have to take minutes.
I don't think you ever served as clerk of FinCom. I'm just pointing that out.
I think he nominated you. That's what I heard.
Second,
You really don't have to do anything. I don't think the clerk, not even like the select board, we have to sign something.
Yeah, I don't think
occasionally.
you're doing a good job.
I think clerk is the one who's technically supposed to read the legal notices,
Yeah, which we never have, right?
which we don't have for this committee. You're right, okay, so never mind.
Or you'd be third in line if the chair and vice chair
You can
would.
chair a 3-member committee.
Yeah.
doesn't the clerk write the end of year report for the town report?
No, generally the chair,
Oh, okay.
or unless it's designated. Actually, we nominated, like Peter wrote it last year, so.
Oh, okay.
Would you accept the nomination for clerk?
Sure.
And all the responsibilities that are given thereunder? All right,
We
he
have
said
someone to
yes.
do minutes.
Yes, we have something to do minutes. Do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No,
No, okay. Against his nay, he is nominated, all right.
I don't like unanimous.
Okay, so then we have the review capital inventory of assets and updated capital plan. I think the town manager sent this to everybody. I don't know how much people want to review it or they want to take the time to review it, to look at it next time. It's pretty self-explanatory.
So just as a comment, I'm really glad to have it.
Yep.
I think it's,
Well, I said I would have it for the
Yep,
first meeting.
you did.
And so thank you to the town manager.
I think it's very helpful to be able to see it all in one place.
Yep.
What I'm particularly interested in, I don't have it open in front of me because I didn't think to charge my laptop before I threw it in my bag. There are items that don't have a replacement schedule, like tractors and that kind of thing. There are also some items, and I should know this, like in the school department, we bought a new mower this year, but to my knowledge, we haven't retired the old one. Is there a possibility of adding like a retirement or dissolution or?
For those blank cells?
Yeah.
I would hope so.
Okay.
Those are either I did not get a response on, or there is no plan to, for that piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a dollar threshold that makes you put something on this or not?
No, this is just a list of all our equipment, but I think everything probably would qualify. $20,000 threshold and over.
Yeah, for somebody who deals with, IT and databases all the time, I mean, every time I come to things, I want to be able to see a list, like there should be a picture of the item, I should be able to double click it, it should tell me everything I need to know about that item. When it was bought, when it's due to be retired, what it cost, like, every time when we get the GIS map, I always like click on things like, why, how come I can't find this? Like, this must be data that we have somewhere. So, as much as we can do, and as we review this, if there's columns or entries that don't exist, we should let the town manager know.
Yeah, I hear that. In reviewing it, the thing that's always hard for me a little bit is I'm like, okay, John Deere tractor. That's a very broad category of item, as specific as it is. I have a John Deere tractor at home. I do not for a second think that's what we're talking about here.
Right, well, this should be the model.
Yeah.
It's a 544K loader.
And I want, that is not meant as a criticism of what you put together for us. I am grateful. I want to be, again, clear about that. I have so much more info than I had, and I realize.
This is.
I'm gonna use the reverse info, by the way. Unless you mean it to be negative, let's assume that it's not. And therefore, when you say something
Not
negative,
insulting.
I really mean this to be negative.
I have a lot of very sensitive people in my life, and it is just.
I'm saying that, I know how you're
My
referring to
position,
it.
you learn to become desensitized. But I would say in the capital plan presentations, especially the DPW directors, he did a great job last year of how he did his PowerPoint, and it had a picture, it had all the pertinent data on there, so, and
Yes, and as we talk about that for a second, there should be, because last year, there were, some people did it in PowerPoint, some people did PDFs. Can we get I don't even care what the standard is, but just set up a standard so that all the department heads are giving us the same type of file. Because it was like, it's a lot easier to go through a PowerPoint when you're sharing it than a PDF, which I'm like scrolling and everything. So the more standardized we can get everybody's, that would be great.
Did we, kind of an addendum to that, I don't remember off the top of my head, did we get them ahead of time last year for a review or like?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I haven't gone back through my notes from last year. I end up putting into my note program ahead of time anything I can, so great.
So one question I guess I have then, so like TC Passios is listed here. Sure, there's a TC Passios and it's 47 years old, but within that there's a boiler, there's a kitchen, right? There's basketball, I mean, no one cares about basketball hoops, but there's all sorts of things in there that perhaps need a little bit more granularity. Is that tracked anywhere?
not that I know of. Yeah, it's not something in the last year that has been done as far as a complete inventory of all the. There is software that our facilities uses for work orders and everything, and that was meant to be more of a tracking system and preventative maintenance and scheduled maintenance for all those pieces of
So within that software
assets
it
within
lists,
the building.
within that software it lists all the major systems and,
I can't say that for
Okay.
sure. Yeah. And
So it seems as
because
though-
of changeover in that position, yes.
yeah, and I know that the facilities is a new position, new role. But it seems that that would be another thing over time.
No, I think
To
that's
have,
definitely
right.
would be useful to have that building by building inventory.
Yeah, like particularly HVAC.
Major-
Yeah, need the big systems.
Yeah, big systems. Roof.
Yeah, roof replacement timeframe.
Fences at parks and,
Yeah, this would be, yeah.
Well, review this, since the last one just came, the newest one just came, why don't we all review it in the next meeting? If anybody has any questions, we can do it. Otherwise, it's just a good to have, and it's really good to have when the departments present, and then you can see what they have, because there were a lot of questions last year. I was like, okay, well, how many vehicles do you exactly have? And they were like, they didn't know, and we didn't know, and we didn't have it, so now we have it. So,
for everyone's reference, I did, because I'm clerk, I guess I can now officially. I did create a SharePoint for us so that we can put all the materials in one location. And then you don't have to go through emails to try to find everything. And I added all of it to the SharePoint.
We'll just share the link.
Is that the Welcome to Capital Planning Committee group
Yep.
email?
Yeah,
Banger.
that's what
Love
I
it.
was wondering, because I
What?
thought about that when I was sending these, should I create a SharePoint folder? But Peter has a BloombergSchools.net, so it's not a Office 365.
Gmail, not,
Yeah.
365.
You guys can't consolidate on the one?
There's a lot of, schools get a lot of free stuff from Google, so it makes sense to be on.
There's nothing
Gmail.
more expensive than free stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you can, I don't,
I think you should be able to add an external
Be able to
email.
share the link.
You can share
to
an
it.
external email to a SharePoint.
Should leave it out.
Yeah.
It depends on the nature of our license.
yeah,
And our
Test it
security
out.
policies.
yeah, because it said I could actually make it open to the public, which it,
Well, you don't want, well,
You
well,
could-
technically it's all public.
once not all of it, I mean, and once we talk about it, it is,
Yeah.
but there may be things that are not, so.
Right. If you could look into it, I don't think we have to decide that tonight.
Yeah, just, we can,
Yeah, and
Worst
it's-
comes to worst, I can get a town email address, right? I mean,
Can pay for it.
okay.
put it on the capital plan.
I found you when I typed in Peter Beardlaw, so.
At least the school department one references all of the town email addresses in our directory.
well, I'll tell you
I'll
what,
look
can you two work out whether it works?
Yeah.
And then, because obviously it'll work for all of us.
Yeah.
But if it works with you, then you can email us and say, here's the link to the SharePoint. And then I'll upload, or the town manager can upload material there.
Yep, that would be much easier.
Yeah, and then if we can have minutes in there too, it's a good spot to just drop the minutes and.
Yep. Who was doing the minutes for us?
Danielle Marr, I don't
Is that
think
the
you know
new-
her, she does the Economic Development Committee.
Okay. This
She's
is-
gonna be doing
She's the one you
finance.
just appointed?
No, she's been,
Oh, she's been, okay.
a minute
Okay.
clerk for a while.
Okay.
You're knocking the hell out of that clerk job. Look at that.
Yeah, that's, you did double the work that the clerk did all last year.
Were you the clerk?
Was I the clerk?
I don't even remember.
I have no.
It might have been me.
That's how important it was. Nobody remembers if they were clerk.
Might have been me, I don't know.
All right, so the way this, so for you, Chris, the way this committee meets is that we always gotta try to find the off date, and it's on a Monday or a Wednesday, depending on when the planning board or the school committee is not meeting. So that's why it switches between Monday and Wednesdays at 6. I don't know, do we know what the calendar, I haven't looked at the town calendar. Because I'm assuming, when are you gonna send out the request?
Well, that kind of depends on the committee, because I want to make sure all the criteria are all the same, we're not changing anything in the evaluation components.
Okay, so you're saying we need another meeting to go over that, unless anybody has any?
Yeah, unless there's any, yeah.
Is there any objections to the materials we got, the evaluation
Like the
material?
Collins stuff?
The Collins score and, you know, I think all of, I mean, if anything, there was more stuff than I needed last year, but.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I was going to request, and we could do it on the front end, I don't think it's all that important, is the issue around, is it a multi-part request or not, and the scoring associated with that. I never got the logic on that.
Well, because of the engineering and.
Right, yeah, but why it should be more or less based on the.
For the engineering,
Yeah,
Score?
well, it was, I don't know if it specifically calls out engineering, but I think in the criteria it was, I don't know, obviously not looking at it and haven't looked at it.
Like a
year.
multi-phase or something.
Yeah, and there were,
And it adds like some number of points.
right, yeah.
But I would personally almost rather that was a separate flag, because I don't know how to dictate how many points, like something could be multi-phase.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter, because if it's put off 2 years, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It could be multi-phase, and it is absolutely mission critical to $5 million that's already been spent.
Right.
That will all have been wasted if we don't do them.
Well, I think that's the point of having the multi-phase, is
Yeah.
that point. I think the second point of how it affects the score, the Collins score is there as a reference, as a guideline, but it's not the be-all, end-all, I mean.
Nor would if we use it as a be-all.
Right,
No.
right, but it's just a guidance point.
But I mean, I like it as a guidance point. I don't particularly see the value in contributing to the score myself, because I almost want to be able to play with the spreadsheet and say, okay, here's the, sort it myself so I can be like, here's the multi-year projects and their ranking, here's the non-multi-year projects and their ranking, and then, if I don't know if that makes sense, but rather than, oh, the multi-years get an extra 3 points or whatever, and that bumps them up, but
Well, I don't mind that it affects the score, because again, the score is just there as a reference point.
That's fair.
As long as I know that it's multi-year, that's the important part. And I think that's clear on the
Yeah,
form.
and again, I don't, if I thought that this was going to have any material effect on our list, I would make a big deal of it, but I don't think it's going to.
So I think
I can live with not understanding it or agreeing with it.
with the committee's agreement, I would just say that we're gonna use the same criteria, and that way we can get them to the department heads quicker than not. Is there anything for us to do before we get those returned?
No, I don't believe so.
And how long do you usually give people to return them?
So usually about a month.
Okay, so if we look at our next meeting being
Weeks.
first week in October, is that okay with everyone? Unless there's a reason to meet that somebody wants to before then?
Would the if we wanted to make some requests for standardizing how the departments present their information to us, not the score, but their presentations to help us understand, when would we need to give them that information for it to be timely for them to be able to respond appropriately?
I would say as soon as possible. I mean,
Yeah.
wouldn't have to be the time that the requests go out, because when they return them, then we'll schedule the meeting, so they'll have X amount of time to.
I guess my point being, is first week of October enough if we want to say, yeah, we would like it PowerPoint, we would like you to include X, Y, or Z if that's feasible in their presentation to us. Is first week in October enough time for them to do that?
Probably, well, I don't know how long it takes them to do their presentation. Maybe they work on them at the same time.
Just for point of clarity though, Heather, you're not asking for PowerPoint on the 1st of October. You're asking for a list of projects and.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
They're gonna have to complete everything through ClearGov.
Through ClearGov.
Yeah.
Right, right, which is already, it is what it is.
Right. I have a meeting on how to, tomorrow actually, how to roll everything over to make sure they don't have to
Right.
obviously re-enter.
I'm not against having a quick meeting in the middle of September to go over what you're asking so that people know, hey, I want these questions answered, at least, when you present it. One would think they would do it anyways, like, okay, why are you asking for it? What is the ramifications if you don't get the money? These are basic things, I guess. As far as the format, I think we could say now, listen, I want them all easier to share the slide presentation.
Sorry.
If we think that discussion can wait till October, I'm fine with that. I don't know that it needs to happen sooner. I just wanted to bring it up because I would hate for us to have some ideas of what we'd like them to really share with us in the presentations and then give them that info too late for that to be an effective request.
Well, then if everybody wants to think about that, we can talk about it at the first meeting.
I'm fine with that, but if we think that will give them enough time, it seems fine to me, but.
Well, once we meet, we're gonna hopefully have them back. Nobody's gonna be scheduled for a presentation yet, so that'll be the next time.
So we would meet the 1st week of October and then presentations would start following.
Right, like the 3rd week of October, yeah.
Yeah, sure, okay, I'm comfy with that.
So one thing,
Loudest phone I've ever.
one thing we did on FinCom, and I don't know if you do it here,
Trying to get to my
is
calendar.
we request the information like 48 hours beforehand. Can we make that same request?
That's what we're trying to do, yeah.
Okay. And then,
That's worked pretty well.
I do think if there's a basis of estimate on there, if there's not a basis of estimate, I think whatever requests come in should have, like, here's how I estimated the cost on it. Now, some of them will be, it went into the policecruiser.net and got the price, but.
Yeah, I actually emailed all the departments the end of July just to get them start thinking, like, we haven't begun, but we'll be beginning soon the process, so, because obviously sometimes it takes a lot of lead time to get an estimate, so.
Yeah.
To start getting estimates for projects that they were gonna be submitting. So.
Okay.
Okay,
So the school committee calendar is posted. I can share it with you if you don't have it, or you don't have it. I don't know who's gonna.
if you share it,
Yeah.
I'm the one who's scheduled.
Okay.
And so everybody, please get your email with the town straightened out, because.
Yeah, I worked on it.
Okay, and, because I'll put out when the next one will be,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
before I
mean,
put out an
The
agenda.
problem that we're gonna run into is, like, I think we're in off weeks in September. But then we immediately run into one of those months where the 1st of the month is like a Wednesday or
Right.
something, and it screws everything up. And planning board and school committee are running the same week, so that happens I did look at it and it happens relatively quickly.
Well, in the past, what we've done in order to not lose pace is that
Do a
they're,
double week, yeah.
like, they'll do, there's some weeks we'll do Monday and Wednesday to make up for those weeks that you guys are in sync, so.
Yeah, that's fine with me, so.
Yep. Sounds good. All right, yes.
So last year, October 13th was the deadline for departments. I think you started meeting at the end of October.
Yeah, well, we'd like to leave a little bit of time, so if we're ahead of the game, good.
October 26th, I think the school committee was first.
Okay.
Well, if we can put them out and make them do, the first week of October, or last week in November, or the September, we'll push up everything.
Do my best.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is, we do have it on our calendar. We're reviewing it and then approving it 2 weeks later. And I want to say our approval date is our first meeting in October. So, but I can share that with you as well. Just
So, again, so please let me know when you're doing that, when their submittal date is, because if it pushes a week, then we'll try to meet the second week in October, whatever.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any public comment from the public? We don't have a public. Well, we have a public. Did you have anything you want to say? No, okay. Any public comment from this committee members? Okay, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None. Good night, everyone. We will see you in October.